Hi there everyone, hope you're doing well. I noticed this tweet recently from a Muslim journalist here in the UK of some description. It's quite interesting. She states, "I've noticed a growth of Western Muslims criticising Muslim majority countries like Saudi Arabia for increased social liberalization. It's clear that the new centre for ultra-conservative, hardline Muslim thought will be in Europe in the coming decades." Now this is a very insightful point that pierces through the veneer of the dominant progressive liberalism of the age. The harsh truth is that multiculturalism, like many leftist ideals, is built on a nice-sounding idea, but fundamentally it's a flawed ideology that misunderstands human nature. The message that we get from the mainstream is that multiculturalism fosters a symbiotic relationship of peoples and cultures all embracing each other in total equality and respect. Yet far from enriching Western nations, as I explored in yesterday's video, this is all really just a front for the wants of money power. And secondly, if you're genuinely patriotic or religious, you'll see quite quickly that multiculturalism is really just a play by the dominant liberalism of the age in order to dominate nations and overtake their historic traditions and peoples. Back in the real world, you'll see that when different cultures meet each other, they don't coalesce in perfect harmony. Usually, one is completely subsumed by the other. One may be allowed to exist if it remains a minority and quiet, or they become total enemies and define themselves against the traits of the other. You see this dynamic between the English and the French. Despite having quite significant genetic crossover, a lot of our national identities were formed after battling each other for around 1,000 years. We all know the cliches, we're Protestant, they're Catholic, we're practical and stiff upper lip, they're romantic and expressive. This even breaks down to culinary differences. The British fare tends to be more direct and hearty, and the French more romantic. After all, they invented high dining. And it was the French who put forth the idea around the world that our food is absolutely terrible, that Americans still rag on us for to this day.
Hey wife, we're out of rat paste! Perfect, nice and black, just how I like it. No need to put it in the icebox. We like our beef a little warm. Guess what we're having for supper? Muggy onion slop!
That is quite good, to be fair. However, I always feel sorry for some poor English guy in the comments who's spent his life being a chef trying to convince the world that English food isn't that bad. It's never going to happen. You just got to laugh at some things and leave it be. But the core point I'm trying to make here is that when two cultures collide, they can overemphasize their differences in order to reaffirm their core identity. Now, it's this same process that we're seeing with Islam in Europe, or more accurately, young male Muslims in Europe. The trend that we've spotted across the continent is young male Muslims and converts to Islam tend to be more fundamentalist than their parents, and I think this is for several reasons. Firstly, as I've explored a lot on this channel, mainstream Western liberalism doesn't tend to like masculinity. It will only speak about masculinity in a negative light, toxic masculinity and so on. Masculinity will only be seen as a good when men ape the qualities of women. This means many lost young men are craving a sense of guidance, and given Islam is left alone by the liberal regime because it's diverse and therefore part of intersectionality and therefore good and feminist, they're still allowed to have a masculine dimension to their tradition. And this means that Islam can provide a path of structure out of drugs and crime and all sorts of misbehaviour and so on for lots of lost young men. However, and this is the most important point, that path does not come at the expense of being a rebel to the mainstream Western society. And this is where we get the modern pipeline of the edgy rapper character who was once most interested in booty, booze and violence, turning into a devout Muslim. Although on the surface it seems like the identity has changed massively, we must remember that the core energy hasn't changed. Now this is where figures like Mohammed Emwazi, better known as Jihadi John, and Abdul Majid Abdel Barry come from, both London Muslim rappers who ended up fighting for ISIS. Now these are extreme examples, I know, and I'm not saying every lad who embraces Islam in London ends up like this. The point I'm trying to make is there is this odd unity between being rebellious towards the Western mainstream with hardcore rap and then shifting that more towards hardcore Islam. Now, I've actually seen this in real time in London. I used to work in an office with a black guy who'd adopted Islam, and I once asked him why, and he said he used to be a Christian, but then he found out that, Christian was white and the whites have oppressed the blacks and so on, all the sort of left-wing stuff. Now, when I pointed out that the Muslims too had quite a big slave trade, bigger than the transatlantic one actually, I immediately noticed he got very angry, the eyes narrowed, yeah, but they didn't chop their balls off, which they actually did. And look, I left it there because you could tell this guy was just angry, and imagine that if it went to HR. Toxic white male bigot questions black Muslim on his wonderful faith. Get out of our beautiful corporation. But to bring us back to the core point, far from Islam bedding in with the rest of multicultural utopian Britain, it turns out that many young Muslims see themselves as some sort of neo-Malcolm X type figure. And this brings us to the second part of this lady's tweet, and that is some of these conservative Muslims do actually have a point about the Middle East and its liberalising. Case in point, this is the video the journalist made her comment above, and as you can see, it's two Saudi guys who've opened a nightclub worth £25 million in Riyadh. They've got more money they can burn out there, eh? But anyway, the point is, this isn't spiritually Muslim, this video, it's spiritually American, specifically American materialism. These two lads look like the sort of guys that end up on a podcast with Andrew Tate and Lily Phillips. Then you have places like Dubai, which present themselves as a bastion of Islamic success and order. However, we all know it's really just because they're sitting on a gold mine, and beneath the supposed Islamic austerity, there is a very seedy underbelly with plenty of prostitution and Western influences going over there, so the Arab fellas can take a dump on them. I think they get off on that for some reason. The Islamic world is now also tied into the globalist economic system, which is going to blur the lines of usury, which is supposed to be banned under Islamic law. And of course, the other side of the Western Muslims are increasingly embracing Western liberalism and intersectionality, especially if they can be seen as victims. Despite many people seeing Islam as a threat in the modern Western world, and I can understand that concern, I'd say this is all probably quite good news from a Christian traditionalist perspective. After all, despite Islam having the tough guy reputation of the age, hasn't cowered to Western liberalism, still got a masculine strain in the religion, more Muslims coming into the West and higher birth rates, the question has to be asked, what's the power behind that? When we explore the different key dimensions in this video, we can see that Islamic power is either worldly in its economic iteration, that comes from the oil, it's either from some sense of Western intersectionality, which is just more liberalism, or it's from a more fundamental energy, which is really only there because it's an opposition to the Western mainstream. Now, this isn't me saying that the Muslims don't have a rich historic tradition which genuinely does offer paths to the transcendent. It's me saying that they're not relying on that energy, which is the true tradition. They're relying on worldly power. And this is exactly how Christendom fell. It fell for the trinkets and promises of the world and then realized it had destroyed itself from the inside out. It's exactly what Islam seems to be doing to me now. However, given Western man has descended into materialism a lot sooner, and our culture has already basically died a death, many people are now craving that spiritual rebirth. They're looking for their roots. And when we find those roots, we must find the heart of the tradition, which is not in opposition to something else. It's the great non-dual truth that gives birth to a civilization. If we can rediscover that, we're really onto the magic. This is, of course, why I'm speaking about personal and spiritual transformation and rebirth on the new channel. That's linked down below. You want to connect with me exclusively, get exclusive content, please do join the Substack, which is linked below. Do let me know your thoughts in the comments, and please do subscribe to this channel if you're new. Do have a great rest of the day.